socialism forward. It is the character of the EFF to defend those who cannot defend themselves, and for being able to do this in an environment which is hostile to our ideas. I salute you, fighters. Cheers. Comrades, the EFF is the only opposition political party in South Africa's parliament that has built legislative capacity, meaning that we are able to write bills which are deliberated upon in parliament, and some will be adopted as acts of parliament. Amongst the bills we have written are the Banks Amendment Bill, which was hijacked by the National Treasury, which introduced a Financial Matters Amendment Bill, which makes it possible for the state to establish and own banks. Before the EFF got to parliament, the state was not permitted by law to own banks. Now, because of the EFF, the state can own banks. In the immediate, the South African Post Office should apply for a commercial banking license for the Post Bank and the African Bank. The state should own 75% of the African Bank and provide 25% to real black business, not mediocre and chance takers. We have also introduced legislation on the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, because it is one of the few banks that has private and foreign shareholders in the world. For true economic sovereignty, South Africa should discontinue private shareholders from the South African Reserve Bank, and the EFF will provide a legislative framework for such to happen. It is false and misleading claiming that discontinuation of private shareholders in the Reserve Bank will lead to compensation in billions of rand to private shareholders. This is because the dividends that are distributed by the Reserve Bank do not exceed 200,000 annually. So it is not possible for anyone to claim or demand compensation of billions of rands on an asset that were never going to earn them any billion in their lifetime. We, as the leadership of the EFF, understand the concerns of many people have over the current government's ownership, control, and mismanagement of strategic assets and entities. The reality is that the current administration is deliberately sabotaging state-owned companies so that they can sell them to their friends, since they will soon lose power and control to the EFF. State-owned companies are very important strategic drivers of economic growth and activity, and they should be properly managed to achieve such. The importance of South African Airways, for instance, is not just about domestic travel. National airlines are used as mechanism of boosting tourism into the countries that own those airlines. State-owned airlines such as Turkish Airlines, Emirates, and Qatar Airways play an important role in boosting tourism into their countries. And tourism is one of the most important contributory factors to economic growth. South African Airways must not be sold to anyone, because the bidders will be foreign companies which will not care about the strategic importance of a national airline. Those who assess the importance of SAA on superficial balance sheet are short-sighted. Eskom is in crisis. We want Eskom in its entirety, from generation, transmission, and distribution, to be owned by the state. Transnet must not be sold to anyone. Instead, participation of private sector in ports of entry should be limited and ultimately abolished. For national security purposes, for state must have exclusive control of all ports of entry and terminals. The Oppenheimer's Fireblade terminal must be nationalized. The Rupert's and Bisvest control of ports of entry in their harbors must be abolished. Importantly, comrades, the South African government must establish highly skilled and supported state asset supervisory council, which will demand monthly operational, technical, and financial reports of all the key state companies. In this way, we will avoid a state where state-owned companies enter into unmanageable levels of debt. The establishment of a state-owned pharmaceutical company is long overdue. The South African government must form strategic partnership with Cuba to build adequate pharmaceutical capacity here in South Africa and in Cuba. All these objectives can be achieved once our organization takes political power. But we need to get the basics right. We are on the correct path to power, but we should never be complacent. Our victories should not blind us to the many challenges that confront the organization. This includes the fact that the EFF is not yet fully established in all corners of South Africa, with branches and revolutionary activists who understand and are passionate about a mission. The EFF does not have councillors in 24 municipalities, and this will change in 2021 local government. Many branches do not have programs of action and do not meet regularly to decide on the work that must be pursued to win over the masses to the struggle for economic freedom. The EFF CCT committees are not fully functional, and despite being assigned to specific tasks, most commissars sitting in front here do not do anything in relation to their CCT portfolios. We must not lie. Chairs. A substantial number of EFF leaders, mostly those deployed in positions of responsibility, are not loyal to the EFF, but loyal to their positions of deployment. You must note that. You must note this one. Let me repeat it. A substantial number of EFF leaders, mostly those deployed in positions of responsibility, are not loyal to the organization, but loyal to their positions of deployment. You are going to see it. You are going to see it when this conference finishes. Some of them are not going to be elected, and they are going to start insulting the organization after not being elected. The EFF has not built adequate internal capacity to win municipal ward-based elections. This is a huge challenge in light of the fact that municipal elections are partially ward-based. We need to build capacity to win wards and win municipalities. The EFF does not own the buildings it uses as offices at all levels, and the leadership that will be elected here must be mandated to own all its offices. Not all CCTs, PCTs, RCTs, and BCT members can articulate EFF vision and standpoint with clarity. It is so disappointing that you have a national leader of the EFF who can articulate EFF vision and standpoint on anything with clarity. I hope this conference will not use the CCT as a dumping area for mediocre. You must provide us with the best of the best. While established, a lot of branches do not meet consistently and do not lead community struggles. That's why when there are by-elections, you don't win wards, because most of you are not known to your communities. And when we campaign for you, they say, who is this one? Most regional structures are directionless and do not have the necessary impact expected from EFF structures. Most provincial leaders do not know the length and breadth of their provinces, and PCTs do not meet from time to time as is expected of them. Regions do not meet consistently and have no mechanism to consistently monitor the work of branches. Branches are not fully functional, not engaged in any form of program, and majority of them only meet when there is either election or assemblies are approaching. The EFF Student Command has not gained a life of its own. It remains heavily dependent on EFF mother body to carry out its daily and constitutional functions. I never said the EFF Student Command must be dissolved. I challenge them to be a biting tool for the young people of South Africa. Comrades, we carry the obligation to be honest when assessing our capacity so that we can provide remedies and strengthen the organization for the future. The EFF sets the agenda in South Africa and the entire African continent. The whole of South Africa is engaged in the discussion of the land question because of the EFF. In our struggle for socialist economic freedom, our primary focus is the land question, and this is consistent with our ideological tools of analysis. When outlining the vision of a socialist future, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels said in the Communist Manifesto, and I quote, "These measures will of course be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable." I close quote. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purpose. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wasteland and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by more equal distribution of populace over the country, and free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production. These are part of the 10 demands which were adopted by the League of the Just in 1884, and they are all still applicable today. In South Africa, the landlessness of the black majority and Africans in particular is as a result of colonialism and later on apartheid. As we speak, the colonial settlers own and control more than 70% of land in South Africa, and these numbers are the same for all former colonial territories. South Africa's land size is 122 million hectares or 1.2 million square kilometers. Under colonialism and apartheid, black people only own and control 16 million hectares of the 122 million hectares, making it only 13% of South Africa's land surface. Post-democratic South Africa owns 17 million hectares of land, which administered by different departments and entities. South African National Parks administers 4 million hectares, and the other hectares are administered by the state, including by institutions such as Ingonyama Trust, which administer the land that is essentially state-owned, public works, municipalities, DTI, forestry, and some productive farms. The land can be used for agricultural purposes. The land that can be used for agricultural purposes in South Africa is 37 million hectares. And according to the land audit issued in 2017, whites own 26 million hectares, or 72% of that total 37 million hectares farms. And agricultural holdings by individual landowners, followed by colored people who own just over 5 million hectares, or 15% Indians who own over 2 million hectares, or 5% Africans who own just over 1 million hectares. Africans are more than 80% of the population in South Africa, but collectively own less than 5% of agricultural land. To properly locate the EFF position on the land question, let us pay some attention to the part of the land that is owned by the state. Although being a minority owner of land, the state owns some parts of the land through national, provincial, and local government level and departments. And most of this land is land that was previously owned by Bantustan. In various instances, the state is the custodian of less than 17% of South Africa's land and has issued this to different users for different purposes. The state is the custodian of water and minerals, and it should be the custodian of the land with guaranteed security of tenure. A policy position that seeks to expropriate land piece by piece will not work in South Africa and will not solve the huge land inequalities that exist between black people and white people. In the 25 years of democracy, the ruling party has only bought 10% of the land from white colonial settlers because of their willing buyer, willing seller approach. What this means is that in 50 years of democracy, only 20% of land will be bought. And in 100 years, since 1994, only 40% of land will have been bought. We as a generation should refuse to be trapped in the gradualism of former liberation movement, which lacks capacity and political courage to take back the land. Let us dismiss the policy position of all other right-wing political parties, which include the former liberation movement in power, which says the solution is distribution of title deed. The position basically says that the government will come contribute pieces of papers in areas where black people are staying without relocating them to any other area. If you have doubts that the policy of distributing title deeds is part of the establishment policies, just look at the fact that Johan Rupert was personally distributing title deeds to informal settlement dwellers in Stellenbosch municipalities. And recently, Investec was doing the same in Soshanguve. These two are part of South Africa's white and racist capitalist establishment, and they are creating a false sense of ownership by distributing pieces of papers and not distributing land, which is our primary target. Our position on state custodianship of land does not mean that we will not guarantee security of tenure on those who use the land. Our position on state custodianship of land does not mean that we are going to take people's homes and houses and will never abolish children's rights to inherit their parents' houses. Our position on state custodianship of land does not mean that we are going to collect rentals of land users in the same way some traditional leaders are doing. Our position on land question represents superior logic, and any other form of land redistribution will not even scratch the surface on land inequalities in South Africa. Chairs, commissars, and compatriots, our country is in crisis. It is a man-made crisis. The economy of South Africa is not growing, and this means that the revenue the state collects to provide basic services will decline. The country's debt to the GDP ratio is approaching 70% of the GDP, and government is spending more than 200 billion paying for the debt services. Unemployment is at its highest form, and this unemployment affects black people because white people's unemployment is less than 7%, while the unemployment rate of black people is more than 40%. Our country is not guaranteed consistent and dependable supply of electricity. Our public transport infrastructure and services are not improving. Informal settlement dwellers are swept away by heavy rains and immediately become homeless. Our people are dying from preventable diseases, and this applies to black people. The life expectancy of black people is less than that of white people in South Africa by 15 years. All these socio-economic problems are happening while the white capitalist establishment is celebrating the election of their puppet as a president. White supremacists are comfortable and happy under the current administration because their puppet is now in office and is marginalizing African leadership in all strategic sectors of the economy and government. All these social ills are happening while the cabal continues to use illegal intelligence to publicly persecute political opponents. Black professionals are being marginalized not only in the private sector, but also in key public-owned companies. There is a huge wage gap between white and black people. White people earning 3 times more than black people. South Africa is currently the most unequal society in the whole world, with less than 10 billionaires who control wealth that is more than the wealth of 26 million people. We still have people with disability that do not have houses in South Africa, and government has a list of almost all people with disability because majority receives disability grants. In the same way we give them grants, we should prioritize them. We should prioritize people with disability for provision of houses and essential because they are special people. We still have areas in South Africa without running water and electricity. We still have racist farmers who abuse our brothers and sisters in farm, evict them as and when they wish to do so. The current administration is not just incompetent, they are also very dangerous. From this NPA, we should engage in militant programs to oppose the attempt to incapacitate and therefore sell state-owned companies. When the previous administration tried to undermine our country through the corrupt family criminal syndicate, we did everything in our power to remove their puppet, and it is evident now that he was replaced with a more dangerous capitalist establishment, which is working in alliance with all white political organizations. We carry the obligation to remove this sitting government from political power because they are failing dismally. We should send a strong caution that if the current administration hands over power to unelected people, their president, like the former president, will not finish his term of office. We have said on several occasions that we have not elected families to lead this country and will never allow families to run this country. It is on these grounds that we should understand state failure over the past few years, particularly destroyed by corruption, nepotism, and cadreship deployment. A post-colonial state everywhere in the world have been confronted by twin challenges of economic inequality and corruption. There is a strong relationship between the inability of the post-colonial state to lead economic growth that is characterized by massive sustainable jobs on one hand and kleptocracy that leads to the state failure and general collapse of the state. Our own situation is not different. Since 1994, we have experienced moments of sustainable but jobless growth, particularly between 2001 and 2004. This is happening while inequality between black and white are widening. The ruling party has presided over a false macroeconomic policy which was based on a misdiagnosis of South African capitalism. They assumed they could implement solutions in South Africa that are cooked in Europe experiences. When the economy offers little job opportunities, the state becomes the only employer in the long run. Yet since its very inception, the post-apartheid state never prioritized merit. People are employed because they are relatives of politicians or they have bribed officials to get a job. People get business with the state from national to local government through corrupt means. As a result, because merit was not prioritized, we end up with people executing important roles in institutions without technical skills required to do so. At local government level, there is massive paralysis that has led to the collapse of basic services like water, roads, schools, sanitation, and housing. South Africa is a country that can deliver world-class infrastructure in just few years to host the world's biggest sporting tournament, the FIFA World Cup, yet fails to eliminate pit toilets from rural schools. Nothing is more exemplary of a failed state than the state of health in our country. People go to hospital to die, not to get medical improvements. Health in South Africa is on its knees. There is no equipment or medication. There is overcrowding, which has resulted in the impossibility of these hospitals ever remaining clean as centers of medical care. Today, a hospital is dirty and under-serviced as a taxi rank. In fact, even the treatment of patients who queue in lines to receive medical attention are addressed the same way disdained the taxi marshals address passengers in taxi rank. The introduction of the national health insurance is small, suspicious steps forward. However, without equal attention to equipping public hospitals with machinery, the country will simply surrender to the draconian pricing method of private health care. The implementation of NHI has to be parallel with an aggressive regulation of pricing in the insurance industry and hospitals in general. In addition, we must ensure that a state-owned pharmaceutical company is fully developed and supported to avoid buying medical drugs from private sector. The Assembly will notice that when it comes to pharmaceuticals, patent laws are going to be a big problem in the manufacturing and generation of many drugs and medicine. A truly new global patent order has to be inaugurated in the medical and pharmaceutical sector. Surely, it is time the world accept that we should not be making money out of saving people's lives, particularly on diseases probably created by the same pharmaceutical companies seeking profit. Fellow fighters, our very last cardinal pillar speaks of open, accountable, corrupt-free government and society without any fear of victimization by the state agencies. In this country, there is only accountability for opponents of the incumbent. There is very little rule of law. If by the rule of law we mean classic and principled idea that we must all be equal before the law, then in South Africa some are more equal than others. Most importantly, in the recent past, our judiciary has not exercised the same strictness and coldness we saw when they were dealing with the constitutional delinquent in the form of the former president. Our judiciary is, however, not completely lost, and thanks to the people like Chief Justice Mogoeng, who are still loyal to the land and not to the incumbent. Chairs. It does not mean that we will not disagree with Mogoeng in future. And disagreement does not mean that we want to do away with the judiciary. Tomorrow when we criticize Mogoeng, those with a mind the size of a peanut should not say we are wishy-washy. We will be criticizing his judgments like we always do. But it doesn't mean that Mogoeng is not a man of honor and integrity. When it comes to that, you will never fault our Chief Justice. We must continue to challenge the judiciary to remain fair, to treat everyone equally and in the same way. We need them to always be above politics and ideological differences. They must speak law, nothing else but law. The most important question to a judge is, what does the law say, not how I feel? No. The day they descend into any other terrain which is not law, they will lose confidence and betray the very idea of supremacy of the law. The doctrine of the rule of law also means that judges too are subject to the rule of law. No one, not even them as officers of the court, are above the law. It does not matter what they think of whoever appears in front of them. They may not like this person, but what they are obliged to do is administer justice and justice. Not choose the color, the weather, the season, or who is in front of them, whether it's a president or a minister or a leader of an opposition party. It doesn't matter. The question all the time, judges, is what does the law say? Justice is justice no matter the condition. It must be the same to all. Even when they act in commissions of inquiry, judges must inspire confidence and independence of the administration of justice. When we appear in front of them, all of us, rich or poor, suspect or victim, must feel safe that we will get a fair hearing and treatment. That is why we have defended the public protector from the recent onslaught against her office. Judges must deal with each report on its merit. They cannot treat all reports the same because they are not the same. Like many judges, the public protector will get the law wrong. Like magistrate, she may even show some incompetency. Yes, the court must point those out in relation to specific reports in front of them. But once she has written a solid report pointing to abuse of power, they must affirm her. They must help that office to have the necessary biting teeth against the powerful it is charged with investigating. They must not make it easy for those who are powerful to simply ignore, suspend, or override her remedial actions. There cannot be protection of the office on the basis of who occupies it. It must at all times be treated as an office whose power and existence flow directly from the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. Commissars, we should know that the enemy forces, white monopoly capital, and its representatives will fight back because our program seeks to take over from them. The enemy forces will use the media and state institutions to persecute and prosecute the leadership of the EFF because they realize and know that our program will bring about quality, and they do not want equality. The capitalist establishment will use everything in their power, including intelligence services, the banks, and everything to persecute the leadership of the EFF. Comrades, in South Africa, the banks are more powerful than any other institution. The democratic dispensation has surrendered power of our people into the hands of banks. And these banks are used by the owners of the means of production to go after those they disagree with. We need to zoom into these banks. The banks can never be powerful than the will of the people. The banks can never decide the direction our country takes. The people should decide which direction our country takes. We should pay a specific attention in this assembly on these banks because they are now law unto themselves. The enemy forces will also try to break the unity of the organization by planting agent provocateurs who will use the same script of white monopoly capitalist media to speak badly about the leadership. We should refuse to be defined by white monopoly capital and their representatives. One of the mandates from this assembly should be that the leadership should build and strengthen alternative communication and media platforms that communicate to all South Africans directly. The advances in technology gives us direct access to the people on a daily basis and in real time without depending on media platforms, most of whom are hunting dogs of factions of the ruling party and domestic and global capitalist establishments. Media freedom is guaranteed. They are here. They wanted to be here. They wanted to have 600 delegates, more than 3 provinces combined. That's why they've got their own allocation, seats and table. They are delegates. Delegates from the media. Chairs, media. Media freedom is guaranteed for genuine media, but those whose proclaimed agenda is to destroy the EFF must be isolated. Our constitutional right of association is also a right not to associate with representatives of enemy forces. Fellow fighters, no other institution in South African democratic society has been more manipulative, embedded, abused, and abusive as the media, or to be more precise, South African media. As the second MPA, we must indeed reaffirm our commitment to defend the independence of the media and its necessity in a democracy, particularly in the work of holding those who are powerful accountable. We need well-qualified journalists. We need seasoned journalists who will not seek to impress their white masters. Let me give you an example. Yesterday in a press conference, a stupid journalist asked a stupid question. He says to the TG, "How much did you spend here? And how much did the liquidated VBS," this is not in my report, "how much did the liquidated VBS pay?" Just listen to a foolish question. Liquidated and payments. How can a liquidated company pay? Domkop. Why bonor ne kopisa skolong yen? Liquidated company and making payments. How? Come on, man. Go and revise your books of journalism. Journalism 101. Please, don't be scared of books. You must read. Don't ask clever questions, quality questions. We want you to ask questions, not mediocre. That every time you raise your hand, we know now comes a stupid question. We must further reiterate that we believe in the self-regulation of the media. There must be strengthening of institutions like the Press Ombudsman and the South African Broadcasting Complaint Commission. Inasmuch as media must be independent from the state, business and religious powers, it must, like the rest of us, be held accountable. This is because the media holds social power, the power that can build reputation and destroy them, the power that mask or unmask unjust wars like those in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Libya. They have the power to inform or misinform society, at times to the detriment of people's health, livelihoods, and safety. The accountability mechanism in this country are terribly weak and enjoy no public confidence. In fact, journalists have to worry about the credibility of their work, particularly in light of press values like fair and balanced coverage. Above all, about sensationalism, the art of blowing things out of proportion simply to sell papers or multiply audience. Sensationalism is now the order of the day, starting storms in a teacup against those the media simply declares as enemies of society. No other political party in post-apartheid South Africa has been declared from editorial pages as an enemy than the EFF. South African journalism has to isolate itself and really enter a great introspection about how they think, feel, and report about the EFF. The evidence of their disdain of us is everywhere, and each day it is mounting. We are the first to defend the right of the media to write critically about us, as critically as we challenge the ruling party in parliament. But we only ask that they speak the truth and isolate Stratcom agents amongst them. South African media, stop being in denial. You are infiltrated by an organized, well-orchestrated, covert intelligence organization which has captured many of your editorial rooms using covertly attained information. Ask how people get to know about the private accommodation of others, get access to their rooms soon after they depart, so as to dig in their dustbin. Ask the rights of those people, are the rights of those people not important to the media? What kind of media project or ethos is being galvanized by ignoring the fact that information could have been attained through intrusive equipment that violates people's rights to human dignity and privacy? Ask what drives a senior, well-seasoned journalist to release the addresses, pictures of residents of those they politically disagree with, despite the fact that these are people belonging to families with children who have rights and have independent social standing. Can a journalist that is litigating against a politician still ethically and confidently say they can cover such a politician with fairness without any conflict of interest? Why are journalists who openly say they belong to political parties still allowed to cover opposition parties? What about conflict of interest? It is a fact today that state security and crime intelligence has many in the editorial rooms on their payroll. People have been long warned about this. Is it not time that you relook into your own systems and ask crucial questions? What can we do to avoid being infiltrated and used by the powerful in the games that they play with other powerful or weak forces? Today, we don't know what you achieve by attacking us. We simply call on you to self-introspect. Fellow fighters, we must challenge the public broadcaster to reimagine itself as a broadcaster of the African continent. If SABC was truly rooted in the continent in terms of stories, music, news, sports, and many other programs, will not have these levels of Afrophobia. The SABC has to actively reintegrate South Africa culturally into the African continent. Comrades, many of us do not know what's happening in the other parts of our continent, because the SABC does not help us to deal with the mindset that was installed in us by the colonialists, that South Africa is actually not in Africa. It is a different country from Africa. There is something called Africa there. There is South Africa there. That's why people, when they speak of South Africa, they refer to Africans as if we do not belong to the same continent. There is good music in Nigeria. There's good music in Ghana. There's good music in Mozambique. We don't know it. But people from Ghana, people from Mozambique, people from Zimbabwe know South African music, because all African countries have come to accept that we are one thing. But the SABC, which has got no vision for Africa, is closing out African stories. There's only one journalist in SABC, Sophie Mukwena, who's got interest in the continent. The rest of them, if you were to ask them, where is Sudan on the map? They will never point Sudan on the map, because they don't have interest in Africa. It's not only SABC, by the way. The entire delegation here will not know where Sudan is. It is not time to dispense with the digital migration program since it has actually failed due to general incompetence of the current administration. Why is the SABC not pursuing or allowed to pursue and enter in the same space of direct to home which MultiChoice is operating in? Fighters, our primary political program is contained in the EFF founding manifesto, which was adopted as the official political program in Soweto, in the National General People's Assembly on what is to be done. The analysis, the diagnosis, and solution provided for in the founding manifesto are correct and will stand the test of time. Generations of economic freedom fighters to come will look upon the EFF founding manifesto in a similar way communists and socialists look upon the Communist Manifesto. The founding manifesto of the EFF is our primary political program, and the 7 cardinal pillars are the main non-negotiable pillars which will hold this organization together forever. The EFF founding manifesto begins with a caption that of Frantz Fanon, which says, I open quote, "A generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it." I close quote. The EFF represents a generation which has discovered its mission, and we vow that we will never betray our mission. The EFF 7 cardinal pillars constitute the core of our political programs, and we will never retreat from these pillars. Substitution of any of these pillars has a potential to undermine the cohesion of the EFF. The question we should be asking is, what do these 7 cardinal pillars mean in practical terms? Let us remind each other of these pillars of our revolution. 1, expropriation of South Africa's land without compensation for equal redistribution in use. We have dealt with this land question today, and we can report to this assembly that we are making progress on amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. 2, nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors of the economy without compensation. South Africa is home to more than 50 industrial and precious minerals and metals, and these minerals are not contributing to the economic emancipation of South Africa. Mine workers are treated like slaves and even get killed by the ruling party when they demand better salaries, like it happened in Marikana. We need to nationalize the mines in order to locally beneficiate and industrialize our mineral resources. The law, MPRDA, says that the state should be informed of the minerals leaving the country, and such is not happening. The current administration has gone very far to withdraw the MPRDA because they are scared of the white capitalist establishment. 3, building state and government capacity, which will lead to the abolishment of tenders. What we currently have in South Africa is a corrupt state incapable of performing its own function. The state cannot build roads, it cannot build power stations, it cannot build railways, it cannot build schools, it cannot build hospitals, it cannot even buy stationery for offices. All these tasks are given to corrupt private companies who bribe state officials and politicians for them to get tenders. We need a state that can perform and deliver its own services. Our public representatives are beginning to realize this pillar by pushing for insourcing of certain functions in municipalities. By the time we get to 2021 local government elections, all EFF caucuses should have tabled motions in municipalities, legislatures, and parliament to insource workers. The bill that was introduced in parliament by the EFF should be passed into Act of Parliament. Free quality education, healthcare, houses, and sanitation. Education in South Africa remains a privilege of the few, and absolute majority of our children cannot gain access particularly to post-secondary teaching and education. The struggle for free education should be intensified. We take this opportunity to salute the feast must fall generation, which confronted the regime in a militant and uncompromising way, and call on generation of students now to fight until free, quality, and decolonized education is a reality in all universities. Cheers. Five, massive protected industrial development to create millions of sustainable jobs, including introduction of minimum wage in order to close the wage gap, the rich and the poor, close the apartheid wage gap, and promote rapid career path for Africans in the workplace. Majority of consumers of goods and services which we consume and buy from retail stores here in South Africa are not made in South Africa. The plastic products, the electronics such as phones, televisions, sound system, fridges, and many other products are made in other parts of the world. What this means is that we as South Africa are creating jobs for other people in other parts of the world by consuming goods and services that are not made in South Africa. Instead of passing legislation that compels all retail stores to buy locally produced goods and services, the current government is trying to convince ordinary citizens to buy South Africa. How are people going to buy South Africa when there are very few products and services produced in South Africa? We should, in the immediate, table legislation which will make it compulsory for government to spend not less than 80% of the budget on goods and services that are made in South Africa. Government is the single biggest buyer of many goods, and it should use its buying power to drive localization and industrialization. 6, massive development for the African economy and advocating for a move from reconciliation to justice in the entire continent. The economic development of South Africa is interdependent on the development of the entire African economy, where African trade amongst each other and make sure that we all have real economic activities. The development of South Africa should be linked to the development of Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Lesotho, Botswana, DRC, Malawi, Nigeria, and all the countries in the African continent. An illusion that we will become prosperous by closing borders is just an illusion. We carry the obligation to develop the entire African continent. The last pillar, open, accountable, corrupt-free government and society without fear of victimization by the state agencies. We have seen over the recent past that the current government is committed to the protection of corruption by state officials and politicians. Corruption in government starts with the head of the state, who steals public money and uses all institutions, including parliament, to protect himself from accountability. We, as the EFF, should continue to expose the massive theft of South Africa's resources and must fight against the politicized persecution and prosecution of political opponents. It is only the EFF that can change the conditions by being true to itself and doing everything in its power to achieve the 7 cardinal pillars. While at this, we should clarify that the EFF policies and programs do not say we should nationalize everything and everywhere. Our deliberate and targeted program is on nationalization of strategic sectors of the economy, and our discussion document on state capacity clarifies this question of what the strategic sectors of the economy are. Must not go around listening to teachers that socialism means when you own a car, you must park it and leave the key there, and someone else comes and takes the car and drop it somewhere, and someone else comes, and that you will never own an underwear because when you wash it and put it on the fence, someone is going to take it and wear it. That is vulgarization, or that is vulgarizing socialism. So read the founding manifesto of the EFF and the Communist Manifesto, all of those issues are being clarified. ESCOM should remain under the ownership and control of the state and should not be unbundled. Instead of unbundling, ESCOM should develop internal capacity to produce electricity from renewable resources. ESCOM should be capacitated to build adequate and safe nuclear capacity to safeguard electricity supply, and all coal power stations should be improved to limit and unlimitedly eliminate carbon emission, because we associate with green concerns raised around the devastating nature of coal to the environment. Electricity in our age of existence is not luxury, but a basic human right. There must never be a household or public institutions without electricity in South Africa. And the additional capacity we build should be extended to helping with electricity in the entire African continent. The National People's Assembly should deliberate on the phenomenon of the fourth industrial revolution, the rise of the e-commerce in the world. Fellow fighters, it is important not to underscore the phenomenon of the fourth industrial revolution and how this affects or speaks to our program of change. We must do this because one of the most important obligations flowing from our founding manifesto is to lead massive industrial development to the creation of jobs. We will have to design and speak to an industrial strategy that has in mind the global move towards machinery and technology made possible by the 3D printing, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and the Internet of Things. We ought to pay attention to this development for the skills impact they will have, which in turn will affect curriculum in schools and universities. The existence of intelligence robots in mining, farming, manufacturing, and infrastructural development have to be looked into. The impact of nanotechnology is medical diagnosis and treatment of diseases in general. The power of internet programs in banking, the movement of money, and the possible disappearance of paper money or coins. How imminent are these developments to the economic practices our country has today? How immediate steps can be taken to take advantage of them, invest ourselves as a country so we gain expertise and specialization in many of the areas. The first industrial revolution was largely about the steam engine. The second was about electricity and automation. The third was about digital computation and mainly communication technologies, the internet, the computer, and the mobile phones. We are now in the fourth industrial revolution, and it is the era of cyborg, an intelligent, human-looking robot. Perhaps the commitment we must immediately make is to build the factories that will produce these cyborgs. If indeed the cyborgs are upon us, then fighters, post the fourth industrial development, we have to rethink wages as a tool for social inclusion if robots will be doing all the work in society. Living will have to be different. An economy will have to be re-intellectualized. But for now, our task is clear. Embrace the technological development and take advantage of them for the total economic emancipation of our people. Artificial intelligence, robotics will fundamentally change the nature of the world. We, as the developing nations, will be the most affected because our hope was on building labor-absorptive industrial capacity. But industries of the future are not going to be labor-absorptive, meaning that industrialization might not create enough jobs to address our unemployment crisis. The other immediate challenge that comes with the new forms of industry and trade is the fact that brick and mortar into virtual stores will threaten the revenue the state collects to deliver basic services. We should build adequate capacity to maximally collect taxes from online trading platforms such as Amazon, Alibaba, and Uber. Other than maximal revenue collection, we should build internal technological capacity to have initiatives to Uber, Alibaba, and Amazon. Without superior technological alternatives, we will not survive the age we are entering into. We will need to adjust our education system to feed into the so-called fourth industrial revolution. There must never be a learner who's not computer literate. Fellow fighters, chairs. Fellow fighters, we will be dishonest if we did not acknowledge that our 6 years of existence we have witnessed the bravery, selflessness, and undying spirits of revolution in the students must fall generation. It was these students who, for the first time in post-1994 South Africa, showed courage and national resistance around the genuine call for free education in our country. They resembled the generation of Nkgopotse Tiro, of Steve Biko, and their ideological superiority and willingness to face any consequence in the fight for the dignity of the black child in South Africa. Their call was grounded on principle. The principle that it cannot be that the key to prosperity in society is education, yet this key is exclusively to those who have money. Their call was grounded on the fact that these institutions of higher learning were not contributing to the general well-being of society and were producing students who will be slaves of the capitalist establishment. The fees must fall generation demanded that the institutions of higher learning must represent and reflect who they are, that the lecturers must look like the students, and that the curriculum should represent their aspiration as a society. It is a generation that demanded better infrastructure on campuses, better housing and sanitation. It is a generation that saw beyond its own needs, a generation that championed the struggle for security guards, gardeners, kitchen staff, cleaners, and all workers to be insourced. It is a generation that did what many trade unions failed to do for decades. The fees must fall generation ensured that workers are insourced so that workers become stakeholders in institutions of higher learning. This is a generation that pushed the boundaries of representatives of government until its call was heard. Over the past few years, we have witnessed the scraping of debts of students and the registration of students regardless of their financial background. As a result of the sacrifice of this generation, we have witnessed the removal of statues such as that of racist imperialist Cecil John Rhodes, as a result of a generation that understood its generational mission and identified its enemy. We have witnessed curriculum being reviewed so that they speak directly to development needs of Africans in Africa. We have seen young black intellectuals rising up in the ranks of higher learning. For this progress, we salute this generation. We salute those who have risked their lives and qualifications in pursuit of a greater cause. We salute those who have paid the ultimate price in pursuit of this struggle, the likes of Mlungisi Madonsela. We salute those who continue to be jailed in pursuit of this genuine struggle, the likes of Kayat Kakeshe and Boginkosi Kanyile. We salute those who were expelled from institutions of higher learning for fighting against institutions, for fighting against rape culture in institutions of higher learning. The brave young women of Rhodes University, we salute you for standing up against rapists and the management that protected rapists. We say to this young generation that your sacrifice have not been in vain. You have inspired revolutionaries across the world that with conviction anything is possible. You have shown to us that through black solidarity around a common cause, through revolutionary change is possible. This is a generation that will forever be remembered and celebrated in South Africa. There is no other constituency in our country that has been neglected than the youth, the black youth in particular. Fighters, the war on Nyaupe is being lost on our streets. The drugs lords have taken over. Our schooling system still experiences high dropout rates, as high as 40%. That is the number of young people we cannot account for. The entire schooling system and university system can't account for where it is this 40% that dropped out of school. The greatest child neglect scandal our country can never be proud of. This is a big scandal of a country where you don't know where your children are. 40% of them left school. And when we are asked, where are these children? No one can give you a clear answer. We must make sure, comrades, that we continue to fight for these young people to be included in the economy. Comrades, sporting facilities, arts facilities, recreational facilities have to be mobilized to fight against gang culture, drugs and alcohol abuse. These have to be mobilized with people with disability in mind. We ought to fight for rehabilitation centers to save our youth from addiction, or we will lose them for good. This is where the student command should be most useful. The student command must go beyond contesting SRC elections, which often encourages opportunism and careerism. We need activist-based student command which thinks beyond blazers. Comrades, when COSAS was formed in South Africa in 1976, 1979, following the 1976 student uprising, COSAS was formed. And when COSAS was formed, it became one of the biggest affiliation to UDF. There were no youth organization. Every young person on the street, in the absence of youth formation, declared themselves, even when they were outside school, as members of COSAS. There is no youth league in South Africa. There is no student organization in South Africa except the student command. The student command must be radical, must attract even the non-schooling youth to join the student command, because they will see it as the only home for young people in South Africa. When we say this, the small minds say, no, he wants to dissolve the student command. We formed the student command. Without a vibrant student command that is rooted in the daily struggles, activities, and aspirations of students, we will fail to find relevance within the most important constituency, the youth. The struggle for quality, decolonized education starts with education system that is tight enough to stop the dropout rate. Young people must go to the properly equipped schools with quality sporting and art facilities and with competent educators. Then we must champion the decolonization of the curriculum. We need a curriculum that prioritizes the African experiences in science, in mathematics, in music, social, and medical sciences. A South African educated child must be able to know where Sudan is on the map, what music originates from Mali, where is Kilimanjaro, and what language is spoken in Tanzania. Such a child must see themselves as part of Africa, embrace Africa, and desire its success. So when our children are asked, particularly those who have a privilege of taking them to former Model C schools or private schools, when they are asked to take an extra subject in the form of a language, we should not encourage our children to take extra lessons in Chinese language. in French language. We must encourage them to take extra lessons in African languages, particularly Swahili, which is spoken in many parts of our continent. Stop this nonsensical thing of self-hate. When we come to our houses, you brag that my child can even speak French. Show them, Papa. Show them. Don't want those things. Don't want those things. We must say my child can speak Swahili beyond speaking Xhosa, Zulu, Pedi. They can speak other African languages. That will make us to know that we are part of Africa. Fighters, in preparation of this speech, I've searched everywhere to try and see how the revolutions have managed to deal with this issue I'm about to deal with. And I've realized that no other issue in the revolution, no other issue the revolution has struggled with than the issue of gender-based violence. Because many women, even in countries that are socialist-led, they are still abused. The abuse of women and the girl child is a painful thing. Many think there is a surge in the incidences of women abuse, femicide, rape, and sexual offenses. We must not confuse a surge in the reporting of these crimes with the actual surge in the crimes. The reality is that what is on the rise is not gender-based violence, it is the reporting. Gender-based violence has always been there in high numbers, normalized in everyday cultural treatment men give to women. Once we think there is more killing and raping of women and the girl child now, today, than in the past, then we are missing the point. The abuse of women and the girl child is ingrained in the cultural and traditional DNA of South Africans. It has been with us for centuries. We are a country that treats women with disdain. A woman in South Africa is ultimately just a tool to be used by men for sexual satisfaction. A domestic slave who must just look after children, often under completely exploitative conditions. We can indeed fix the criminal justice system to ensure that it punishes the perpetrators of these horrific crimes. But until we undo the phenomena in our everyday life, we will not succeed. It is important, comrades, to note that the women of our country are abused, and many of them, including girl children, are told not to report those crimes because they are family affairs. It needs elders to come and resolve the beating. There is no better place to resolve sexual abuse or violent crimes than police station. Never listen to any elderly advice that says do not report an abusive man because it's in family affairs. Because by doing that, you'll be allowing this criminal to continue abusing many other women. It is with this background that a woman's command was engraved in our Constitution. It is because there must be a special and dedicated focus on these matters. The formation of the Women's Command is not only long overdue, but is extremely urgent. Those who say a women's command will be a kitchen undermine the intelligence of women. Those who say the issue can be dealt with in the mother body where men are already dominating are missing the political tactical advantage of a separate exclusive force. Note this, separate exclusive force. So in the army, there is what they call task force. It doesn't mean the army is useless. It must achieve a particular specific obligation. So we must have a separate exclusive force in the EFF called the Women's Command. When workers are abused, you agree that they can form a trade union. When students are abused in schools by teachers and university administration, you agree that they can form a student union. When black people are racially exploited and colonized, you agree that they can unite and form a liberation movement. Yet when women are abused, exploited, killed, raped by men, you say they must not unite as women and fight back. You want them to work against rape with the same men that rape them, work against femicide with men who kill them, work against women abuse with men who abuse them. We are saying that anyone who says women must work with men who beat them up is lost. We need women to unite on their own and fight any man who rapes them, fight any man who abuses them. Because women, you've got a responsibility to protect each other. When there is a man contesting a woman, woman must come to the defense of a woman. The EFF needs a women's command to mobilize women, unite them against the scourge of women abuse. All women, meaning all those bodies that men target for rape, sexual violation, humiliation, and murder. Women must unite and speak truth to power until society accepts them as equal partners, until society is free, is safe from them, respect them, and allow itself to be led by women. Comrades, there is a war against women in South Africa, and we should leave this NPA with a clear program on how we fight gender-based violence. The struggle against gender-based violence starts with you as an individual and with all of us as families, friends, and as organizations. We must isolate and banish all people that are involved in gender-based violence. The EFF should fight for equal gender representation in all spheres of strategic leadership in society, in the boards of companies, in the senior management, in companies, including Dr. Koza, in the PSL. The EFF should be at the forefront of gender struggles and fight against all forms of discrimination. Many revolutionaries in history have posed the question as to whether contesting state power remains relevant as a mode of revolutionary struggle. Experiences of radical social movement, which have abandoned their character upon assuming state power, have led to many on the left doubting the state as a means to forge revolution and social change within society. This is a fair analysis, and is one that must be made in order to improve how we wage our struggle for socialism and elevate the consciousness of our people. There, however, has not been a more ideal tactic and strategy than that of assuming state power as prescribed by Lenin. Those on the left who seem to assume there is an alternative way of shaping modern society, one that exists without structures, authority, and hierarchy, are misguided. Whether such individuals believe in effectiveness of civil society movement or subscribe to anxious and unguided doctrine of anarchy, they are ill-informed and do not understand the role of politically organizing as a means to effect social change. Our diagnosis of the role of the state is one that must consistently be in line with material reality of our time. As things stand, we as the EFF, guided by Lenin, still view state as a tool to leverage the consciousness of our people and effect change within South African society and the world. To make a diagnosis of participation in the state politics that is based only on subjective analysis and not objective reality is tantamount to madness. Lenin's reflection of the progression of the Russian Revolution in different periods due to tactics of the Bolsheviks to locate themselves within parliament represents superior tactical understanding. These are the tactics of exposing the contradictions of parliament, pushing it to its legislative limits while organizing Soviets for the very overthrow of reactionary parliaments that were initially deemed the paragon of democratic practices. He says that there is a great usefulness during a revolution of a combination of mass action outside the reactionary parliament with an opposition sympathetic to, or better still, directly supporting the revolution from within. This is simply to say, fellow fighters, that our participation in parliament is part of our understanding of the revolutionary process of change. This is a change that cannot be done outside understanding of the state of consciousness of those we seek to liberate. Over the past 2 decades, the consciousness of our people has been depoliticized, and it is the duty of our organization to patiently awaken our people to the failures of the 1994 dispensation. It is for this reason that we cannot simply declare alternative means of capture of state power once they are not tactical and sync with the state of consciousness of the people. We will find ourselves leading ourselves, having left our people behind. We must therefore subject ourselves to the test of the electoral politics. It is in this terrain that we will assess our ability to convince our people towards our ideas and maintain ourselves as a legitimate alternative which encourages democracy. We must contest state power as a legitimate means of running a nation according to the will of the people and assuming the superiority of our ideas by testing them through a democratic process. It is when we are successful in this process that we can begin to, without fear or compromise, implement our policy perspective and lead South African society without any doubt on our legitimacy. We have, over the past 6 years, pushed Parliament against its own logic by ensuring that the agenda of the land expropriation without compensation is firmly on the table of legislative change. Fellow fighters, over the past few years, we have pushed Parliament and its organs to insource workers and do away with the capitalist labor brokering system which exploits our people and enrich private business through tenders. Over the past 6 years, we have drafted and proposed, as indicated earlier, legislation that promotes the higher taxation and regulation of corporate sector, which avoids tax and promotes unequal trade relations between South Africa and the West. We have championed the struggle for free education, health and housing, which our people fight for in the streets of our country within the elite corridors of Parliament. And many at times found ourselves beaten up for fighting for our people in Parliament. This is our role in Parliament, and that is why we contest state power, to leverage as many socialist victories as possible and expose the state where it fails on living up to the social contract it has with South African people, a contract based on service delivery and undoing the structural injustice of the past. We will not be able to do this at a large scale. We have been doing it if we had narrow approach to taking up arms or existing outside state power simply because we deem institutions as reactionary. This, fellow fighters, is why we contest state power as opposed to any other means of forging our struggle. It is not our only approach, as we remain a protest grassroots movement, but it is one that is critical to our strategy and tactics. It is one that understands that we cannot leave the arena unchallenged and in the hands of a failing and reactionary former liberation movement. Fighters, as African society, which believes in the values of community, Ubuntu and social cohesion, traditional leaders are important allies in our struggle for the emancipation of our people. They are the link between an ever-evolving society and the roots that makes a people of moral character and ethical example of humanness. The process of colonization and apartheid has eliminated us from our culture and customs, and this has resulted in a deep-seated self-hate amongst African people. We no longer have pride in our customs, as they were made to look evil and primitive, while the white norms and customs are presented to us as upright and pure. Traditional leaders must therefore understand the strategic role they are playing as guardians of our rural community and conveyors of our custom and cultural norms. Traditional leaders must locate themselves within our broader struggle for decolonization and the emancipation of Africa from imperialist practices. It is traditional leaders that must entrench the values of socialism, communal living, the sharing of the wealth of our country equally, and promote the dignity of our people and the elderly in society. Traditional leaders must be allies of the progressive left and not be beholden by money received from the state and any such benefit. A traditional leader is a leader of society, not a leader that exists to enrich themselves or their families. Traditional leaders must promote rural development and ensure that communities that exist outside the metropolitan areas receive quality services delivery and do not live life that is cut off from the development of society. As an organization, we continue to have progressive and respectful relationship with traditional leaders of our society, as we understand them to be leaders in their own right of their constituency and of native practices of Africa. It is from them that we should learn how to govern respectfully, consultative, and communal manner for the greater benefit of our people. Fellow fighters, as a socialist movement, we exist within a long tradition and culture of leftist organization across the world. It is for this reason that we must model ourselves against those who in history have been able to achieve what we aspire to achieve. The late Commandant Fidel Castro has in Cuba achieved what many modern society have thought was impossible. This is to create sustainable and functional socialist state that is able to withstand all pressures and victimization from repressive global capitalist forces. It is from Cuba that we draw inspiration that the socialist perspective to governance is one that is truly, morally, and ethically superior to capitalism. And if one is determined, it is a perspective that we can withstand the most hostile capitalist environment. Cuba has made progressive strides in giving dignity to the people ever since July 26 movement removed the puppet of right-wing imperialists many decades ago. Today, Cuba has almost 100% literacy rate due to its successful 1961 literacy campaign. The community-centered initiative that encourages education amongst Cuban people now sees it having a highly educated population. The fact that education was free of charge for all in Cuba, with various initiatives to get access to education to the poorest of the poor, means that the citizens of Cuba contribute progressively to the development of the country. Students are encouraged to become trainee teachers, which means the cycle of knowledge is constant, while at the same time job opportunities are created. The community-centered healthcare of Cuba, which focuses on preventative and primary healthcare, sees Cuba today have a life expectancy of 81 years for women and 77 years for men. Cuban government prioritizes disease prevention, universal coverage, and access to treatment, and as a result of this, the Cuban health system caters for millions of its population and exists as an example model of modern-day universal health care. Cuba has also emphasized a lot of its development, particularly in the healthcare sector, to functional and well-run state-owned enterprises. Cuba has developed excellent pharmaceutical capacity through state-owned for generic engineering, biotechnology, which has allowed them to find innovative solutions to serious healthcare conditions without being subjected to pharmaceutical companies that are controlled by capital and their interest is only to maximize profit. Cuba, for example, was the first country on earth to eliminate transmission of HIV from mother to child, as recognized by the World Health Organization in 2015. Access to healthcare in Cuba is free, and this right is enshrined in the Constitution. It is a right underpinned by humanist approach to healthcare and people-oriented approach to governance. Provision of food are provided in Cuba to the poorest of the poor, while entrepreneurs are given incentives for the participation in the economy. The state has, since the rule of President Castro until to date, been central to regulating Cuban society, and in short, all sectors of Cuban society remain true to the socialist ideals and guided the revolution. It is a society governed in the interest of the people, one that is self-sustained and thriving without exploitative hand of capitalism. As a generation of economic freedom fighters, we must learn from Cuban state as a model for socialist and independent state. We must fashion our policies and legislative interventions with Cuba in mind and ensure that the state capacity is built in order for us not to be dependent on the loans of the West, as this comes at the expense of our sovereignty. Fellow fighters, Cuba is an example that we are on the right track in our aspiration for socialist society. We must never be deterred by the minority that enjoy our land at the expense of the majority. In the same breath, fighters, we must look to China, the Communist Party of China, as a model for sovereign economic growth. In the same way as Cuba, the Chinese exist as a benchmark for leftist politics on how to run an economy that is independent from capitalist control. From education, the Chinese economy is planned centrally towards inward industrial development. There is a huge emphasis and investment in vocational training institutions, which are the equivalent of our TVET colleges. The Chinese do this because they understand that the importance of giving their population skills that will contribute directly to the sovereignty of economic development of their country. Graduates in China are guaranteed employment because it is a country that has its own factories, produces its own goods, and exports them all over the world. There is a direct link between education and industrial development, and subsequently centrally controlled economy. In China, phenomena such as tax erosion, shifting of profits are very low because state-owned enterprises are well capacitated and the economy functions under the dictates of the strict political policy. This means that the political system in China determines the economic direction and strength of China. It is not an economy in the hands of the few that determines legislation and politics, as we see here in South Africa. This is the case with China. State-owned enterprises to whom China directs high-priority projects in order for them to be profitable. The possibility, therefore, of capturing the Chinese political system and changing its nature to serve the interest of the few is minimal, as principle control the flow of economic returns from investment. The Chinese have strict regulations around foreign firms that seek to operate in China, requiring them not only to open factories where Chinese people must be employed, but also to share their expertise and technologies so that China can produce the products foreign firms offer them. Our policy perspective on nationalization of banks has already been fulfilled. Banks in China are state-funded and state-owned. This allows the Chinese state to set interest rate and above and approve loans. As an ethical representation of the will of the people, the state is entirely in control of that process. Private capital has no room to breathe in China, and all its participation is subjected to state approval and regulation. As an organization, we must model our policy approach to the economy in the same manner Chinese are doing. appointing the leadership of state entities on the basis of merits, being harsh on corruption, and controlling economic activities for the benefit of the nation. There is no private capitalist that has a moral obligation to uplift the economy of a nation. This is why we believe that China is the best representation of how to run a sovereign, independent, and people-oriented economy. Comrades, all these ideas and theories, all this policy perspective, and all of our history is meaningless if we are unable to build an organization that is rooted in discipline. It is discipline that will allow us to give a correct account of the history of our organization in the face of our detractors and agent provocateurs. It is discipline that will allow us to remain true to our 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars and the Marxist-Leninist Fanonian ideas that guides us. It is discipline that will make the EFF viable alternative for the hopeless masses of our people, an alternative that will maintain its protest character while fighting battles within the walls of parliament. It is discipline that will allow us to build a socialist vanguard for the dejected masses of our people in the continent and the world. Without discipline, we are nothing. Without discipline, we will blow with the wind and stand for nothing. Without discipline, we will have members who feel entitled to deployments to parliament and council. We will have careerists flooding the ranks of the organization for economic purpose. Without discipline, we will have people amongst us who speak ill of the organization while claiming to be members of our glorious movement. Without discipline, we will have party members accepting money from class enemies and damaging the integrity of the organization. Without discipline, the premises of the party and the officials of the party will fall victims of attack from people who think that they are radical but are undermining the guidelines and revolutionary code of conduct of the organization. Without disciplined fighters, we'll have fighters who abuse party money and resources, who lie to the organization, who steal from the organization. Without discipline, we'll have individuals who use money to win conferences of the EFF and lie in the name of the organization and its leaders in order for their lobby group to go smoothly. Without discipline, fellow fighters, we'll have factions emerge in the organization. Factions that go to the media and portray our organization as one not having united front. Without discipline, fellow fighters, we'll have a self-seeking individuals who go into legislature, councils, and refuse to meet with communities that elected them and refuse to purchase the material that will allow them to visit even the most rural and difficult areas. Without discipline, comrades, we'll have no direction, no stability, and this once promising organization will become a story in the history of South African politics. Cheers. Commissars, discipline allows us to remain in control of the direction and the sustainability of our movement. If we are armed